Hey everyone, welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I feel like my voice went like way up for some reason, but I'm back to my normal speaking voice. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. Definitely trying to stay focused today. I don't know where I am. Um, on today's episode, we are talking about interpreting customer satisfaction score data, sometimes also called NPS scores. Chris, what does NPS stand for?
Net Promoter Score. It is a methodology for calculating. Well, we have a whole thing we can walk through on that, but I'll let you get the
Yeah,
rest of the introduction first.
I thank you. I'm definitely like my brain is ping ponging today, so I apologize for that in advance. So we'll be covering what customer satisfaction scores like NPS scores are, what the heck they are. This is a question I ask you all the time, Chris. How to compute your own satisfaction scores with tools like Google Analytics 4, and what the heck to do with it? That's the other question I ask you all the time is, great, what do I do with this information? And so we'll be covering all of those pieces today. So Chris, let's start at the top. What is a customer satisfaction score? What is an NPS score?
Okay, so a customer satisfaction score is pretty simple. It's how satisfied your customers are, and there's so many ways to do that, right? You can ask people, "Did you like this thing? Have you ever been to the airport or some restaurants and stuff? There's like that little table you can hit like the smiley face button or the frowny face button, depending on how your visit was. There's all sorts of different ways to measure. One of the methodologies that is really well known in business is called the Net Promoter Score, or NPS. And NPS is a computation created. I think it's Nielsen. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to go look it up. But essentially, it asks people on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with the thing? Now, here's what's different. The math that they use is kind of interesting. So on that scale of 1 to 10, anything below a 6, they consider a detractor. These are people like, oh yeah, it was okay, it's not great, or it sucked. I didn't like the sandwich or the cheeseburger or whatever. 7 and 8 are considered neutral. And then 9 and 10 are the promoters, people who are like, yeah, this was awesome. I'm going to go tell a friend. I really enjoyed it. And so what an NPS score does is it essentially takes the number of promoters minus the number of detractors, does a percentage basis, and says that is your net promoter score. If you have, and the reason that their logic behind this is that you would think this would be or could be evenly balanced, but they're like, yeah, mediocre is still bad. Mediocre is still a detraction from what's good. And so that's sort of the basis of their scoring comparison. So that's what a net promoter score is a tabulation. In fact, there's even math for it on how to compute what those scores are. It's the percent likely versus percent unlikely. So it's just doing the percentages. The percent likely is likely divided by total, percent unlikely divided by total. So in the NPS world, it's promoters divided by the total minus the detractors divided by the total is your net promoter score.
I asked about this in our free Slack group this morning. So trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, and what our members thought of net promoter scores. And one of our members made the very astute comment that, what I think is a 7, someone else is going to think is a 10. And when I look at this range and how wide it is, I can see where this is problematic. Because, as someone who's done survey design, there's the scale is too broad. There's too many options, and it needs to be, so a typical Likert scale sometimes is a 1 to 5. And so 1 being not at all, 5 being extremely, 3 being I'm neutral, and then 2 and 4 being the I'm so not, but I'm so am. That's a fairly straightforward Likert scale. This scale, when I see this, there's too many options. What is the difference between a 3 and a 4? What is the difference between a 7 and an 8? Really nothing.
There really is nothing except in the back end mathematics. And so this is the problem with net promoter scores. And one of the criticism of them is that they don't take into account how people behave. So at Trust Insights, we use a modified version of this, and you will see this in our newsletters and on our website and stuff. Ours is like this: thumbs down, thumbs up, or don't care. And it's just 3 options. Because if you look in the back end data, very often when people are doing scores, just like Amazon reviews, you get a 1 star, you get a 5 star, you don't get anything in between, right? There's always like that one guy's like, I deduction of star because of this thing. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, you have too much time on your hands. But for the most part, people are very thumbs up, thumbs down, or I don't care. And those to us seem to be the easiest way to simplify the mental load for people on responding to a survey.
John, what do you think of Net Promoter Scores? Have you ever worked at a company where Net Promoter Scores were, a big measurement of success?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone so far too as companies that are actually tagging financial compensation and stuff like that to NPS. So it's crazy the way it goes. I mean, really, this approach here is the same psychology behind the other scale. Really, like when you look at the 1 to 10 scale, the idea is that you're only looking at 3 possible votes. It's yes, I love you guys, and I'm going to talk to other people, or yellow is the 7, 8, where it's like it's okay, but it's not enough to talk about. And then everybody below 6 has a problem, right? There's an issue. There's something wrong. And so the 1 to 10 scale gives you some extra granularity. By spreading it out, you do kind of figure out how pissed off people are, because that's the one thing that's interesting. If somebody is even just willing to talk to their neighbor versus a fan that's out promoting you, that's really just a plus. Like those are all just plus ones. Whereas somebody who's angry with you at a 5 or 6 is different from a person who's a 2, who could literally drive hundreds of customers away or drive you out of business. The impact is negative in there. And then the other thing that's with all of this is that it depends on how you use it. If you're going to use it to generate more customer discussions and actually drive in to find out why you got bad scores or why you got good scores, it's great. If you're going to run 5,000 surveys and just people are going to stare at the number and have board meetings about it, then that's a system ripe for gaming. And, it becomes a whole different thing. Which it's, if you have no other measurement stick, then that's great. But, you can do better too, if you want to. It's just a matter of, what you want to do with it and how much gaming you're willing to put up with around it if it gets big.
It's like every Uber driver was saying, please give me a 5-star review.
Yeah, I feel like online reviews is a whole different topic that we should cover at another time. We were actually debating the merits of those reviews this morning as well, but this is essentially, a review system for a company or a service. So
that's right.
What's next, Chris? What do we need to know about NPS scores?
Well, let's talk about how do you get this information, because it would seem like pretty straightforward, and yet it's something people struggle with. So in the Trust Insights newsletter, every month we run this poll. It's the one-click poll. And our data collection mechanism for this poll is Google Analytics, right? Because we want it to be something that's simple. We want it to be something where we can get at the data. And we want it to be something that we can process, and other people could look at it if they wanted to, but we could certainly programmatically get at it. And so what you'll notice is there's this poll, and there's 3 buttons: likely, neither likely or unlikely, and unlikely. And for next month's poll, I am adding emoji.
Oh, to be fair, I did say you could. So
yes.
Yeah. All right.
In the back end, all 3 of these options go to the same page on our website. What's different is that there's a query parameter that either says NPS poll answer likely, NPS poll answer neither, or NPS poll unlikely. And the question that we ask is this: how likely are you to recommend Trust Insights as a consulting firm to someone in the next 90 days? Because this is essentially, it's one of the best questions to ask in surveying for just general satisfaction, because if someone's not likely to recommend you, they either don't know anything about you or they really don't like you, right? You could also ask questions like, how satisfied were you with the service that you received today on today's plumbing visit or whatever. But I like this predictive question because there's a difference between how satisfied I am and whether or not I'm going to promote you. I'm going to recommend you. And so I like this question as a promotion question.
It's interesting because as you were saying that, and this is the question that we'll get to, of like, what the heck do you do with it? One of the things I've always struggled with is I don't understand how this information is helpful. But now, as we're talking it through, which is, admittedly probably something we should have done a while ago, or maybe before this show, because not everyone who subscribes to our newsletter is a client. However, what you're asking is, are we doing a good enough job of explaining our expertise and what we do so that if somebody said, hey, do you know anyone who can fix my Google Analytics or, come and consult on a large learning model project? Then you've read our newsletter and said, yeah, I think Trust Insights does that. That's what they're always writing about. So now it's like the pieces are starting to click for me, but I still need more information. But this is okay. I see where you're going with this.
Yep, exactly. And the advantage of using this style collection, because these are just query parameters inside of a URL, there's no, you're just using Google Analytics as the collection mechanism, and the answers are stored within GA. They're stored on a time-based format, and they require no extra work. So if I go into our Google Analytics account, I go into Explore, I just start with the page path and query string, which captures all the parameters and the number of events. And then I say, I want to filter it based on that NPS poll answer, because you remember that's what we use as the query parameter in the URL. And now I could see neither, likely, unlikely, and then there's a couple of anomalies there. So we can see neither is, and this is for the last 13 months, neither is 567, likely is 560, unlikely is 166. So to me, that's just that alone, knowing that alone is like, okay, we're not like, I would even be worried if it was evenly distributed. I'd be like, something's wrong if it's evenly distributed. But the fact that neither and likely are way ahead of unlikely makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first thought was, oh, people are neutral about us, but also, yay, people are neutral. Like, I think it's okay in business if you have an audience who they're kind of meh about you, because not everything you do has to be a viral thing or solve everyone's problem, but you're still retaining that audience because at some point something you do is going to resonate. So yeah, my initial reaction was, oh man, but now the more we dig into it, it's like, okay, that's not that bad, because they could be swayed either way. So now it's on us to make sure we move them in the right direction.
Exactly. And to your point earlier, the composition of the audience matters, right? So if we have, for example, a lot of college students, I'm just giving this up. If we had a lot of college students on our mailing list reading this, would they recommend us to a colleague? Probably not, because they don't have anyone to recommend us to in that sense. Like, how would a junior at Wheaton College say, like, I'm going to recommend you to my colleagues as a consulting firm? Like that, so they would probably, in that case, answer neither likely or unlikely, because it's not that they don't like us. It's just they don't have anyone to recommend us to.
Mm-hmm. John, do you include any sort of satisfaction survey after Marketing Over Coffee episodes? Like, no. Did you like the episode? Did you?
Yeah, up or down? No, we don't do any tracking. With the time delay, it's not like I would do anything with that info anyways. I mean, it's good to get into. A big part of it for us is, when you've done a good one because you see more chatter on social media, people talk about it, and just nobody talks about the bad ones or passes them on. But yeah, I don't know, for podcasting, there's not much as far as tracking and, kind of at the individual level. It's more about, do you trust the brand and do they keep you entertained, long enough? Are they over time, are they good enough to hold your interest? Which is really where it's at. Yeah, I don't know. I probably should. The more interesting one is NPS for sponsors. Are you happy with the leads that you're getting and the value you're getting out of supporting the audience? And, do you have leads that come in that say that they found out about it through us? And yeah, thankfully we have a small enough audience that I'm able to get that kind of information personally. That becomes part of 2 months after every package, go in and ask how things went and how many leads they saw and how things, turned out. And, yeah, it verifies the results too. You can tell at the end of the campaign if it was somebody that has nothing to do. The folks selling shaving materials to a 50% female audience. Yeah, maybe that was not the best use of your money, and it's not surprising the results you get at the when that wraps up.
Yeah. Now there are other folks who are using these systems and using them very well. So here's one. This newsletter called The Rundown, and you notice this is a daily newsletter, and they ask, "How was today's newsletter feedback self improved? Nailed it, average, or epic fail?" Again, thumbs up, thumbs down, and okay. This is if you have a publication that you want to assess, this is a great way to do it, because not only do you get that frequency of up and down and things, but you can now, if you know the topics that were in that newsletter or the news or the information we're sharing, you can get a sense of these articles or these topics. These are the ones that people care about. There's you nailed it that day. Other days, maybe it was a thing on politics and it was like, nope, I don't want to see any more politics. And so you'll get an epic fail from your audience. So these tools are incredibly useful, and they follow the exact same format that we do. So just click on the URL, that's your vote, no extra work, and it allows rapid and good data collection. Like I said, this is right inside Google Analytics. So if you just want to do just the basics, let's look at the last 30 days. Just the basics alone, we have 38 likelies, 27 neithers, and no unlikelies, which is pretty darn cool.
Take the win.
Exactly. Take the win.
Yeah. Take the win.
So now, if you want to kick it up a notch, which I recommend you do, you want to take this data out of Google Analytics and put it into a format where you can get a better understanding of what's happening, particularly over time. And so this is the exact same data, but it now uses the NPS score format. The promoters divided by the total minus the detractors divided by the total equals your NPS score. And so for us, the green line represents 0.5 or above. 0.5 or above is where you want to be. The red line, which is 0, you do not want to be there. And so this is our last almost full year of this data. There's a minimum of 25 responses per month. If a month doesn't get 25 responses, it just won't show up, because we didn't want to have like 2 people responding. But thankfully, that doesn't happen. And you can see, since about April of this year, we've been above the green line more than we've been below it. And April was a really good month. Last month was a good month. The month before was a good month. So our NPS scores from our newsletter to our audience are generally very positive. And this is a big change from last year.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, John, who did you upset in February that we got such low scores?
I know. Hopefully not tied to Valentine's Day in any way. That's my concern.
But no, I mean, and it's, I look at this and I'm like, that's great, we're up. But you can imagine, Chris, what my first question is going to be.
So what?
Why? What's the difference? How do we know what we're doing well? What changed? And so there's a lot to unpack when you see a very simplistic chart like this. Like, you might be thinking, oh, I can present a very simple chart and people will understand it. Yeah, I see that we're up, but yeah, exactly. So what? What do we do about it? How do we know what's working? And then the million questions start to come. So where do we start to unpack that information?
So another useful thing about doing this surveying with your email newsletters, having that in there, is that if your email marketing software is any good at all, you get individual click tracking. So you could go back into your backend database for your software and say, for the last month, show me which of the 68 people clicked likely. And you can go back to those 68 people and email them and say, hey, I noticed you voted likely. Why? What made you likely? What did we do that you said, yeah, I want to recommend Trust Insights to a colleague? You can go to the 0 people this month who are unlikely and say, like, what did we do? What are we not delivering to you that would help persuade you? And you go to those the neither likely nor unlikely and say, okay, well, what else could we do that would change your mind, if anything, to go from I don't know if I'm going to recommend you or not, to yeah, I'm going to recommend you. So because you have that data at the individual level, and obviously we can't show it on screen because it's PII, you can go follow up with people and say, what can we do better? Or what did you really like?
I would imagine, well, not even I can imagine, I know for sure, for a fact, that there's a way to automate that feedback process. And so I've given feedback to other brands that I've gotten like customer service with, or, it's a lot of times where it's used as, how satisfied were you with your customer service? And if you engage with the survey to see, like, I would likely recommend or not likely recommend, a lot of times you'll get an automated notice that says, are you willing to answer a few more questions? And that's a way to get to that detail without having to take that manual step of giving John a list of people to go harass, and then our NPS scores go down because they're like, oh, chief statistician's after me. Now what does he want? He wants my money. He wants my time.
More cold calls, baby.
But yeah, automating that feedback seems like a really smart way to approach it. And you're right. Any decent marketing automation tool should be able to help you do that. Or a CRM system could absolutely do that.
You can even do it right inside Gravity Forms, right?
Mhm.
Because again, we know who the person is. We have their email address. So what they could do is they could click through and then end up on a page like this. It says, hey, we got your answer. Do you want to tell us anything else? Right. So
And
this
I
would be,
think that that's an excellent way to approach it.
exactly. So that's what you can do to get more granularity in the data and to get that qualitative feedback that can give you some direction with the recommendation process itself, and it may reveal to you, for example, in the feedback, yeah, I don't know who I could recommend you to. In which case, it's not a question of do we do something wrong? It's that we didn't make clear. Here's who you should be recommending us to.
Mm-hmm. Here's the type of businesses that we serve.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
The other thing that, and this is what I typically think of when I use this data and I look at this data, is I see this data, see the intent to recommend is higher in some months than others. The intent to recommend is above the green line. To me, that tells me that someone like John could be more aggressive in sales pitches to say, like, yeah, you know what? People are generally positive about us. People are generally thinking about recommending us. That's a good sign as long as it's statistically valid. I'd be okay maybe with 2 sales promos this month instead of 1, or I'd be okay with John doing some more, slightly harder selling, or hitting more of the list of folks like, yeah, you know what, this person didn't demonstrate clear intent, but when that number is high, say, you know what, they might be okay with hearing from John, even if they didn't raise their hand and say, I want to talk to John. This is good for John to ask that. When you look at February, like, John, don't call anyone this month.
Mhm.
Well, I
Unless
think
it's
part of that,
totally
though,
called.
is using this to drill down and see who's who. Like, that's a huge part of it, because months like this month where we've given away a lot of top-notch free resources. I mean, there's a bunch of folks that we're hearing from that are at universities and single person shops and stuff like that. So really, digging down in to see who's who is huge, because even on a bad month, if there's a Fortune 500 CEO that rated us a 9, I want to see what's going on there.
Mhm.
Exactly.
I wonder too, and I'm assuming if we have enough data, we could do this kind of, matching. I don't necessarily want to call it a correlation because I don't know if there's enough, but you know, do the peaks and valleys of the NPS score correlate with, like, um, was it budget seasons, or anything else? Like, is there some kind of seasonality to the NPS scores where we could be like, oh, well, we know, you know, every April our NPS score goes up because for some industries that's the end of their, you know, financial year, so they're looking for new partners, versus February where the new year just started and everybody's already burnt out from trying to figure out what the heck to do with their fancy new budgets, and some companies have already blown through 70% of it and it's only February. So no, they're not going to recommend us to anyone. So when I look at this, that's what I would be curious to know is, does it match up with any other kind of data that would help us understand not only what are we doing well and what are we doing wrong, but there's a seasonality to it. So, in the example of like giving John, you know, either like hit the gas or pump the brakes, knowing ahead of time, like we know April's going to be a big month. Like we can look at our own sales data and know like what months. So that would be interesting too to see, like, does this correlate with our better months than, just looking at this by itself.
And that's exactly right. However, we only started doing this in a reliable, repeatable format in October of last year. We'd done it sporadically in the past, but it was never something we were disciplined about until last year. Like, we just need to start rolling this come hell or high water every single month. First newsletter of every month, this goes in the newsletter. And we have not missed any since October of last year. So we would need probably at least another year's worth of data just to be on the safe side. However, we also do have data that's quantitative survey data with every form fill, right? We ask people, what are the things that you're interested in for better measurement, better tools, understanding ROI and things. And so we could certainly take this data and do that cross correlation analysis with that, do it with the website data, do it with social media engagement data, do it with a number of opportunities or contacts in HubSpot. So there's so many things that you could do that multiple correlation analysis to see what of those things has a correlation to this data, and then that gives you the starting ingredients to do, okay, well, now how do we prove any causality?
And I think that at least for me, that's the kind of, when you say like the so what, that's where my brain goes immediately. Like, well, does this align with, budget planning? Does this align with our sales data? What else could it potentially align with? So like you mentioned, social media data. I don't know that for me, that would really tell me anything, or I could really do much with that, because social isn't a high performing channel for us. I would be interested to know like number of net new email subscribers month over month, because since we're sending this out over email and email is one of our stronger channels, does the number of net new email subscribers correlate to how high the NPS scores go? Because they're people who've never heard of us before, or they're brand new and they're super excited, and then they kind of like, we fall into the background noise after a few months.
Yep. No, I those are all valid questions that the data can help answer. It's just a question of, do you have the time to put that together? And now the good news is these days, the answer more and more is yes. Katie, you and I were talking about this in our company Slack not too long ago, about using tools like ChatGPT's advanced data analysis to be able to do those analyses. Because even if you are someone who can't do the mathematics or the coding, with a tool like that, you can give it the data and say, I know what I want. I can put it into words. I just can't write the code. It will write the code, and then you can get your answers.
So, okay. So we've been talking a little bit about like what we do, but if you were to hand this data to an executive, what kind of an action plan would you put together for them? What actually do they do? Because we've been kind of circling around some ideas, but what should someone be doing with this data consistently?
To John's point, most executives just either give themselves a bonus or just bury it quietly on the shelf.
Right. Or fire the customer service VP, right? They do a staff change over there.
No, the next thing to do is that qualitative research. You ask people, okay, why? Why would you recommend us? Why would you not recommend us? And again, that can, like you said, be programmatically integrated into the system, which is something we're going to look into because it seems like a pretty straightforward thing to do. And then again, from a sentiment perspective, being able to look at the data and say, okay, John, here, I think it's safe to turn up the heat, or maybe it's not. Maybe let's deal with the inbounds as they come in, but don't be chasing people down. So those would be the things that I would say belong in an action plan. Is you have this intent, you can rely on that intent to make decisions, to do more or less of something. If this was customer service satisfaction data from like a call center, then you say, okay, well, clearly we need to be more carefully measuring our call center representatives as to the individual satisfaction that we collect after each call. JetBlue, for example, uses this exact system to rate every leg of a flight. And they look at flights and say, okay, wow, something really went wrong from this New York City to LAX flight that everyone rated it a 1. And then they can go dig into that and say, okay, well, here's what happened to that flight. Oh, it was a 2.5 hours late leaving the gate, and the restrooms didn't work. And so there's some explanation there, but the key to this data is to use the data in any fashion. Don't just take the chart, like do something with it.
I was gonna mention that is that, yeah, it's great to collect the data, but that's sort of where people get lost, and that's the whole basis of Trust Insights is we light up dark data. Don't let this become another piece of dark data that just sits on your shelf that you collect, you don't know anything about, because you start to get into that, I guess, essentially data debt of you have all these pieces and then you have to go back and sift through it and clean it up and figure out. And then, you could find that the majority of people who said they would recommend you are no longer part of your ecosystem. They're not subscribers, they're not in your audience. So you can't go back to them and be like, "Oh, well, remember like 5 years ago when you said you were going to recommend us to someone? Would you still do that?" Because they're going to find that pretty annoying and creepy. And then John's going to get really low NPS scores all over again. It's a vicious cycle.
This is a great way for slicing data, though, when you've got a problem, because the one thing you can do is, you do the first cut, and then you can take everybody 7 and below and send them an email saying, okay, we realize you're really angry with us and have a problem. And you give them the 5 key areas where you normally have trouble with. And so now you've got them sliced again, and you can, get to the core of what's going on. Like the classic Amazon reviews, right? Was it because it was damaged in shipping? I always love to see that people, a product getting a 1 star because it came to my house crushed. Like, not that the company has anything to do with that, but you can kind of weed out basically the folks that are just off their rocker from the ones that have legitimate complaints. And at the whole time, you're not bothering anybody that's happy or content. You're only working with the group that needs some attention.
And that's a really important point for customer satisfaction, because as we saw at the dawn of public social media, different channels get different satisfaction levels, right? Your Twitter call center versus your email call center versus your telephone call center all may have very different satisfaction scores, and they shouldn't, right? They should all be equal or close to equal, because it means you're delivering the same level of service. And if you're not, then you've got some training and education to do to help the call centers reach the same level of hopefully improving satisfaction.
When we were working at the agency, Chris, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, so I know that that's where I was first introduced to NPS scores. I'd never heard of them before, prior to joining a public facing agency. That was a score that they would then also promote publicly of like, look how great our NPS scores. This is why you want to work with us. Is that a common practice for a lot of companies to say like, look, we have a really high NPS score, so we're the ones you want to work with?
I mean, if you saw a job ad that was advertising that, how would that make you feel?
Oh, I would think it was complete BS.
I
mean, like, the lady doth protest too much.
There's your answer. I mean,
I'm also super skeptical of everything, so I'm an N of 1.
You're not, though. I mean, it's one of those things that if you have to say it, it's probably not true. Right? Whereas if somebody else says it about you, okay, like I would believe a lot more going out to a site like Glassdoor and seeing what current employees have to say about that company rather than what the company has to say about itself. Like it's like someone calling themselves a guru or a ninja. Like, okay, you're not either of those things, and I have the throwing stars to prove it. But it is. I would be very cautious about that, because A, it relies on people understanding what an NPS score is as it relates to employment. B, it does make, if you think about it from a non-measurement person's perspective, it means, so am I going to be like constantly monitored if I work at this job, that they're touting these weird scores in their job ads? Like, what kind of tests do I have to take on a regular basis to feed that data?
But I think depending on your role, if you are like head of the customer support team, then it's a relevant score. I used to work at a phone bank. I worked customer service. I'm sure all of us have at some point in our careers. And it was one of the things that I was measured on, because as the person taking the call for the customer, we were rated on, how quickly we got through the call, the volume of calls, and if the person got the information and if it was accurate. And so that was sort of our version of the NPS scores. And so I can see where it is a relevant metric for certain job roles, but it does also feel like a really antiquated way of measuring job performance.
It can be. It can be useful too. So there are one of the things that companies have been struggling with is scaling, right? Customer service is
Mhm.
one of the hardest things to scale because it requires people and lots of people. And if you don't have those lots and lots of people, and those people are not trained well,
Mhm.
yeah, you're gonna have some trouble. This is where, by the way, and this is gonna come full circle to a whole bunch of other things. There was a recent paper published by NIH about generative AI and its use in customer experience. The summary of the paper is that generative AI, on average, delivers a better customer experience than the humans do, because for a couple of reasons. One, there's no time limit, right? When you have a customer call center, one of my friends worked at a customer call center for a bank, and they had a 5-minute window. They were penalized in
Mhm.
their internal scores as an employee if a call lasted more than 5 minutes, which to me is kind of nuts. It's like, oh, hey, someone broke into my account, and they're committing fraud. And like, nope, you have to solve it in 5 minutes or less. And
No pressure.
because of that, the reps also were highly incentivized to end calls as quickly as possible, including just outright hanging up on people, which made the customer satisfaction scores go into the toilet. When you compare that to a generative AI system where you don't have to worry about staffing, you don't have to worry about 5-minute limits, and you can spin up as many instances of a chatbot as you want, of course, you're just going to get better results because it's on the customer's pace and time then. And so you'll see those NPS scores go way up where the customer is effectively not on the clock, right? The customer is not being penalized for having problems that require a lot of time to solve.
It's interesting, because customer experience and customer support is historically such a human thing, and I know our friends over at B Squared, like, that's their whole platform, is that it is a very human experience, and so it's interesting that NIH came out with this study that you're saying, Chris, that the generative AI is better than humans at the customer experience. Does it get into, like, what that specifically looks like? Is it answering basic questions? Is it, how, like, what is it that it's better at?
They were specifically measuring quality of responses, and this was both in marketing. And there's another version of this paper that actually is in medicine, which itself is very interesting, where the ChatGPT responses were rated as higher quality, more informative, and more empathetic when ChatGPT gave the answer versus a human doctor, which was like, okay. But again, it's a language model. It's trained to deliver language in a certain format. But that's what we're seeing with these tools. And so if you're thinking about NPS scores and deploying them, one of the actions you might take is investigating the possibility of can you divert? It's literally called call deflection. Can you deflect or divert a certain percentage of calls to a machine that
Mhm.
will solve those calls in a way that is satisfactory to the customer, that makes them happier than the humans, and then reserves the humans to handle the really difficult stuff where you're like, yeah, you know what, this is going to be a 30-minute phone call between 3 departments of the company because you've got a crazy fraud case to deal with. That's where these NPS scores will help us measure different modalities of providing a good customer experience, and then
Mhm.
also allow us to resource. Because now if I can divert 60% of your call volume away from your call center, the regressive company will like, great, we can cut 60% of our workforce. The progressive company will say, okay, let's now give our call center reps, instead of 5 minutes per call, let's give them 15 minutes per call and see if the call center NPS scores now go up because customers are going to get better treatment because the easy questions are all being handled by machines.
What do you say, John? Would you rather interact with a machine, or would you rather interact with a person when you're calling customer support?
Yeah, it doesn't matter really. I just want like the answer as quickly and correctly as I can get it, which is the thing. But it's really interesting to me on the healthcare side of that,
Mhm.
because there's been a lot of research already and things done about how, working in healthcare fatigues the employees.
Mhm.
It's like if you have to spend your whole day dealing with burn victims, 8 hours of that, you just are not going to have the patience and the ability to do that. So, and we even see this at home with seniors too, things like Alexa, being able to, Alexa will tell you what time it is 500 times a day, and she doesn't care. And you're not going to lose her temper with whoever's in the house. So yeah, there's a lot of customer service stuff that should be outsourced like that, because yeah, infinite patience in the machine is actually something that's going to improve experience for a lot of people. And then it's, as Chris mentioned, like you save the humans for the stuff that's a complete dumpster fire that's never been seen before. That's when a human can cut through it faster. But for the 654th time somebody's called you and you tell them to reboot your phone, you really don't need a human to be doing that.
Exactly.
We have
Well, I
to
think
give Alex a shout out though for his NBS. He said, is that a subset of what we should be scoring?
yeah, that's what I think of those scores. I think they're NBS. So
Yeah.
it's, we at Trust Insights have some modifications to make to our own data collection system, but I feel like I have a better grasp of why we do it in the first place. And I feel like that's always, where a company should start. Like, it's great to collect this information, but, go through the 5P process. What is the question you're trying to answer by collecting this data in the first place? Because it might be different. So, it might be, how efficient is our customer support versus how likely are you to recommend us to someone else? Those are two different questions. They might have the same structure to the survey, but you're asking very different things. So you want to be sure that you're clear about that and that you have a plan to actually use the data.
And that is the number one takeaway. Have a plan to use the data, right? Data that you just collect is just a waste of time. So have a plan to use the data. And to your point, Katie, make sure that you know what that use is. Make sure you're clear on the purpose of it so that you can use it intelligently.
Yeah.
All right. That is going to do it for customer satisfaction scoring data and stuff. We look forward to talking to you folks next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.